Thank you, everybody. So this is day 3 of Thriving in Uncertainty. And today we're going to be talking about perspectives. And before we get into the whole PowerPoint, we'll be talking about, just do a quick summary on days 1 and 2. So as we start to work through perspectives, it's, the world that we have around us is really a mirror of our thinking. And so as you see things, as life kind of unfolds around us or unfolds around you, everything that we have is really around us. Everything is really reflective of a thought, and then the thought becomes a thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But understand that the universe is really a mirror that reflects your thinking. So the first day, we talked about abundance. We talked really a lot about curiosity and how curiosity leads to abundance. And so an open mind creates endless opportunities. A closed mind narrows the opportunities. And so as we're going through change events, as change is occurring, we're spending a lot of time talking about today really about perspective on how we see ourselves in events, is that going through change creates opportunities. It's the reason why it happens. Change happens for opportunity. And so it's important to keep our peripheral vision open. Now, the inverse of that, of course, is a closed mindset. In a closed mindset, you've got very few opportunities, and typically the opportunities that you have in front of you aren't as expansive, which means you've got maybe 1 or 2 that are okay, and then lesser opportunities beneath that. So that was what we talked a lot about in the first day. Be curious when we're going through change about what opportunities are being presented to us. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that as we go on. Then yesterday, we talked about how to manage our emotions through change. And we ended the day talking about your emotional dashboard. So our emotions are basically a feedback system for us. So we get into our car, the feedback system we have in the car is the dashboard. The dashboard isn't the car. The dashboard is telling you, the operator, about the car. And our emotions operate the same way. Our emotions are giving us feedback on the experience that we're having. Are we frustrated? Are we angry? Are we happy? What are the triggers? And triggers are for positive things as well as maybe not so positive things. And so understanding the emotion, not becoming the emotion, feeling the emotion, acknowledging it, okay? But not necessarily becoming the emotion. In other words, you don't want your behavior to become the emotion. What you want to do is be able to understand that, okay, I like this, right? So my dashboard is telling me, my emotional dashboard is telling me, I like this. Well, do more of what you like. Or I feel insecure at this. Well, I want to be curious as to why I'm insecure, because I'm not going to get to the other side or learn anything unless I stop. And we talked about metacognition, which is the process of thinking about what you're thinking about. Unless I stop, pause for a minute before I act, and think about, well, what is this that I'm feeling? How am I feeling this, right? What is triggering this? If it's something that's triggering insecurity, then I want to really stop and understand that. If it's something that makes me happy, I want to stop and understand that and figure out, well, how can I do more of that, right? So emotional dashboard, super important. Great way to get through the day, great way to understand how your emotions are. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to get deep into perspectives. And this is going to be really fun. Today and tomorrow are really 2 of my most favorite topics. Tomorrow is an observer, and today is about perspectives. And before we start all this, what I want to do is I want everyone just to stop for a second and take a cleansing breath. You're going to breathe in through your nose and just let out the air through your mouth, okay? So we're all going to take a cleansing breath. Cleansing breath gives you a moment. It releases whatever energy you've got stored inside of you, and it allows you to be able to kind of start new on whatever it is you're doing. It's that old expression, right? Hey, take a breath, right? That's why people say that, hey, take a breath. Okay, so let's talk about perspectives as it relates to change and how it affects you. So change experiences come to you at the exact right moment when you need them. Now, I know that might seem a little counterintuitive, but anytime change comes, large or small, right? It's coming because you're supposed to be learning something. And there's this great expression that goes that the teacher appears when the student is ready. And there really isn't a better teacher than change. Now, that assumes that we can look at change as a teacher, as a learning opportunity. And that's why we were talking about curiosity before, is because we can't learn unless we're curious. So we can't go through a change event unless we're curious about, well, what am I supposed to learn? And we'll get into more of that about whether, in change events, things either happen to you or with you, and we'll talk more about that. So what's really common when people go through changes, and this is certainly a change we're going through right now with this health crisis, but people will say, well, why is this happening to me? And it's common, we've all said it. We're probably always going to say it. I'm going to say it. You're going to say it down the road. Well, why is this happening now? Why is this happening to me? Here's the thing about that, is that when you say, why is this happening to me? You've squarely positioned yourself to be a victim. Because you're giving up control, right? You're not saying, well, this is interesting. Let's see how this plays out, right? It's like our gentleman here on the slide. Well, why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything wrong. And we're going to talk a lot about the perspective about being a beneficiary or being a victim when it comes to change events, because they're two very distinct ways of looking at things. And each change experience we have creates a learning opportunity and a growth opportunity if we look at it that way. And it's simply about our orientation and our thought process. Simply about, are we curious enough to understand it for being what it is, which is a learning event. So, take a minute, look at this picture. So where is reality? Where does reality exist? And this is where we're going to start stretching a little bit. So reality is behind the eyes, not in front of the eyes. Because whatever we have in front of the eyes, we've created by our thinking and our thoughts and our visualizations behind the eyes. So when we get into self-limiting beliefs, Stephen Covey has a great quote. And it's like, everything is created twice, once in the mind, once in physical reality. And that's true. Every single thing we have around us, everything, somehow or another, somebody else thought about it. My glasses, somebody at the Oakley Design Company figured out that this is a design. It was in his head first, his or her head first. It went on paper. It went into production. So reality really starts behind the eyes, not in front of the eyes. Everything we have in front of us, we've already thought about it once before at some level. So that's where really reality comes from. And it also comes from the heart, right? So the heart and the mind, when they synchronize things, we talked a little bit about that yesterday, about the difference in the magnetic field and the energy that the heart can put out. And so it's a combination of being able to visualize and then feel. So if I can visualize it and I can feel it, so it's not good enough just to feel it, and it's not good enough just to visualize it. You have to be able to do both. And when we get into self-limiting beliefs on Friday, we'll go through an exercise on that. If I want to be if I want to run road races, okay, then I want to be able to, I can visualize training, I can read about training, I can start to train, but unless I can visualize myself crossing the finish line, it's much harder, if not impossible to do. So it's about how we visualize, and can I feel myself running across that finish line? What's that feeling of exhilaration I'm going to get when I cross the finish line? Okay, so it's a combination of both. And like our little tiger cat, with the lion in the mirror, it's a matter of how you see yourself. So how we change our perspectives is how we start to change the reality behind our eyes, which creates the reality in front of our eyes, and then our heart feels our way through it. What's it going to feel like when I achieve this? So that's how we change our perspective about things. It's vision and feeling. You got to do both simultaneously. And we've talked a couple times now about the synaptic connections in the brain. And this is just so important. It's one of the reasons why we've touched on it every single day, is that everything we do at some level is created a synaptic connection. So we have our wiring, right? Our synapses are kind of our wiring. And the more we do one thing, they wire those synaptic connections, they wire together. If you do something once, probably not so much, right? You do it over and over and over and over and over again, either a thought or an activity, whatever the case may be, those synaptic connections fuse together, okay? That's in this picture, that's what that kind of yellow orangey stuff in the middle is, right? Your synaptic connections fuse together, and the more you do something, doesn't matter what it is, because it doesn't know the difference between right or wrong or good or bad. It doesn't know that, you know, eating a whole thing of Oreos is bad for you. All it knows is that I've eaten a whole thing of Oreos, and this is what I'm used to, and that synaptic connection gets created. And the more you do something, the stronger that connection. And it's one of the reasons why it's hard to break a habit, because breaking a habit then requires you to basically work your way through a 3 to 4 week period. It's different for everybody. For some people, it could be 2 weeks. Some people, it could be 2 months. To dissolve that pattern. And I referenced this the other day, I think yesterday, that the National Science Foundation, in their research, that the average person has 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day. 80% of them are the same. So if you're having 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of them are the same, how strong is that synaptic connection getting? It's getting stronger and stronger and stronger every single day. And so part of this is, how do I change my vision? How do I change my perspective on things? And you can't change it once. You have to change it every day. You have to change it every time it comes up. Every time it comes up, something says, well, I can't do this. You have to replace it with, I can do this. And that's how you break down the synaptic connection. And if you think about that, if I have let's just use the high-end number. If I have 60,000 thoughts a day and 80% of them are the same, and it takes me 3 to 4 weeks to either build or dissolve a habit, how many habits am I building in a 3 week period? If I have 60,000 thoughts a day, then 80% are the same. So this is the reason why it's discipline about your thought process. And how do we, that's where metacognition comes in. We want to be evaluating what we're thinking about, and then replace that thinking, okay, with a thought that's either in opposition or in favor, right, of the behavior we're trying to change. So, you know, we've also talked a lot about scanning for threats. So we, thousands of years ago, when we were out traipsing around, a change in our environment, a change in our condition would signify typically danger, right? So I always use if we were walking around in the savannah 30,000 years ago and a twig snapped, well, behind us, you know, we didn't stop to look around, we just took off, because like we didn't know, like we were out looking for lunch, but the likelihood is that we could be lunch if we weren't paying attention. And so that's one of the reasons why status quo is so important. It's the only reason why change is hard for people, is that what I know now is that I know right now I'm safe. I might not like where I am. It might not be my optimal condition or the optimal circumstances, but right now I know I'm safe. Why would I want to leave where I'm safe? And that's where the whole scanning for threats, you know, anytime that there's change, the very first thing that people say is, well, how am I losing at this? What am I losing? And more often than not, change got nothing to do with that. Change really presents opportunities for everybody. And how do we get at those opportunities? How do we leave ourselves in a position where that we are mindful enough to be able to pay attention to what's going on around us, so that we can evaluate what change opportunities exist? And it goes back to scanning for threats. We start first, we avoid change because we're scanning for threats. A change in our environment typically over thousands of years has meant that there's some threat out there. But in this environment, we don't have lions and tigers and bears chasing us down, right? We have just our environment here that we have to navigate to, or navigate through, excuse me. There's a theory about, and many of them I'm sure have heard this, is that the fear of loss versus potential of gain. And it really operates very silently, but very effectively. The fear of loss versus potential of gain. And it's called the loss aversion process. And it's reflective of a general bias that people like the status quo. And that change in an environment isn't necessarily, they feel threatened by it, isn't necessarily a good thing. Again, going back to some of our programming, for, how, with our amygdala, with our lizard brain, remember talking about that. And loss aversion is basically, if you go down to the bottom of the slide, it's better not to lose $5 than it is to find $5, is the example that they're using. So you have to think about that for a minute. If I already have $5 and I gain $5, then I'm ahead by $5. But if all I'm focused on is not losing my $5, I haven't really progressed very far. And that's where people are naturally more prone to fear of loss for potential of gain. I'll keep what I've got. And it's not about being a gambler. This isn't about being, this isn't about being a risk taker, not even a little bit. It's I'll keep what I have before I will try to expand my thinking or my thought process or my peripheral vision, as we've been talking about, to see if there's something else better out there for me. So fear of loss versus potential of gain. And you can kind of do your own little experiment with this with yourself. This would be a form of metacognition as you're going through your day or different events and things like that. And look at what you're doing. Look at your behavior. Is this a fear of loss event, or is this a potential of gain event? Am I not doing this because I'm afraid of losing something? Or if I actually do this, will I actually gain something? So go with the flow. It's about how you orientate your thought process. And I like this analogy, and because I've had a personal experience with it. But going with the flow is, if you ever had any, advanced swim training or scuba diving or things like that, or survival training, one of the strategies, if you get caught in a current or a riptide, that you don't fight your way out of it, because you're going to tire and potentially succumb. You go with the tide, you go with the flow, you go with the current, and you wait for that opportunity to basically slip off into safety. So going with the flow in a change sense is really about how do we work our way through the process to where we find that opportunity. Now, the inverse of that, right? The inverse of that is resisting change and fighting against it. And the more you fight against it, then you're not paying attention to what the opportunities are. You're not scanning for opportunities. You're focused on resistance. And in some cases, there's some change that just doesn't make any sense to resist to. And I'll share just a personal experience with you. I was a scuba diver for 30 something years. I got certified when I was 19, I think. And my brother and I were diving, and we had an incident, and I ended up getting caught in a current. And my brother's an amazing boater. He's an amazing guy. He's an amazing boater, and he's good on anything on the water. And he ended up having to go back to the boat. We're off the Isle of Shoals, off Portsmouth, and so he had to go back to the boat and then come get me. And I'm floating on the water with all my scuba gear, and the tide's taking me away. And I never quite understood, because I've been in the water my whole life. I never quite understood, like, how do people drown? But like in a moment, there was like a 30-second moment where like, I got it. I can see how this worked. And I could see how this could happen, because panic could set in. There's like a 30-second period. I'm like, okay, I can see how people panic. I can see how people drown. And but I remembered, right, just go with flow. There's no reason for me to resist this. It's going to take me somewhere. And when I get to the point where I can slip away, slip out of the current, or an opportunity comes up, either on a boat or whatever, then I'll be safe. And ended up that my brother ended up coming back to find me, and everything ended up fine. But that's part of going with the flow, right? When things are happening, if you put all your energy into resisting it, you're not putting the energy into finding the opportunity. And the resistance piece becomes that tunnel vision that we were talking about, that very narrow focus. When you have that very narrow focus, you're not seeing all the other opportunities. And so the resistance piece really serves to suppress your opportunities. And it doesn't mean you have a terrible situation and you just go with the flow. But you work your way through it. You find your way to those opportunities as they present themselves. But resistance will automatically narrow your focus, automatically. So you want to be going with the flow, looking for the opportunities. So I love this chart. I'm going to move everyone's pictures over here so I can read it. I love this chart. We'll spend some time on this, and then we'll be done. This is like super important. So this is perspectives of considering yourself either a beneficiary of change or a victim of change. So if I'm a beneficiary of change, I'm going to ask myself when the change event happens, right, what am I to learn? If I'm a victim, I'm going to be asking, why is this happening to me? Now, I'm going to stop right here for the why is this happening to me. There's also a process where, and we've all experienced, it could be in large issues or smaller issues, but we have things that happen to us over and over and over again. And that's when you get into the why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me again? Right? That's the other extension to that. And things will keep happening to you over and over and over again until you stop and get curious as to why this is happening, and you figure out how not to have it happen again. So the way the universe works, not to be too esoteric, but the way the universe works, it will keep giving you opportunities, and it will keep showing you up, and the same events can keep happening over and over and over again until you stop long enough to say, well, wait a minute, this has happened to me like 3 times now, or 4 times, or this feels familiar to me. It might be different circumstances, but kind of heading in the same outcome. This feels different to me, or feels same, and how do I get to have a different outcome? So the whole why is this happening to me thing, you've already surrendered your power. As soon as you say that, or why is this happening to me again, you've completely surrendered your power, and you're a victim, right? Beneficiary or a victim. So beneficiary, how does this experience connect to other events that I've experienced, which is just what I was referencing. If you're going through change, you want to ask, if it feels familiar, you want to ask that question, how does it connect? Or the inverse of that is, I can't believe this is happening again. Beneficiary, I'm excited for the new opportunity. I might not know what all the new opportunities are, but I'm excited. I'm like a kid on Christmas morning. What am I getting from, what did Santa bring me? The victim would be, I'm afraid of what I don't know. Why would you be afraid of what you don't know? Because you don't know. You don't know what it is. It could be anything. It could be a pot of gold. You don't know. So anytime that we say, I'm afraid of what I don't know, we have surrendered. We have surrendered our power. We have surrendered our opportunity. We've surrendered our opportunity to have chance be in our favor. Beneficiary, what's a new way that we can do this that we haven't thought of yet? If I'm a victim, I've always done it this way. And in business, and we're going through this now, nobody can say, well, that's just the way we've always done it. The whole mentality of that's the way we've always done it doesn't work right now. So if you want to be a beneficiary, I have a change event. Well, what's new in this thing? What's a new way that we could try to do things, as opposed to being a victim where I've always done it this way and I don't want to change. Next on a beneficiary, what will new ways of doing things lead to? In other words, what will be a better outcome? If I learn a new way to do something, what's the better outcome that I'm going to have, right? And then if I'm a victim, I'm scared to try something new. I don't want anything to do with it. Beneficiary, so change happens, and we just talked about this. When change happens, it is a great time to evaluate. Now, it doesn't mean you evaluate your whole world, or it doesn't mean you evaluate everything, but you evaluate the things that are immediately connected to that change event. It's one of the reasons why we have change. It's one of the reasons why change exists, is it gets us to stop long enough, okay, to look at our world and say, well, maybe we could do this better. If the victim, this could happen at the worst time. Well, and actually, I would advocate that when change happens, it happens at the exact precise moment. At the exact time you need it is when change occurs. Getting down to the bottom two here, I'm a beneficiary. I'm going to gain knowledge through this change experience so I can thrive. So change experiences, when we have them, it's like building a stone wall.
You don't have to get offended, just be respectful.
You have one rock on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. And that's what change knowledge is. You're constantly building your knowledge base. And if I'm a victim, I'm just barely surviving. How am I expected to deal with this? And then lastly, I can go with the flow through this event, or the alternative to being a victim is I've got to fight against this flow of events. You know, very different thinking. So it's about our perspectives, and it's really about how we choose to look at things, because this is a free will existence. And it's about what choices do we make. And we don't always make the right choices. And not making the right choices is okay, because that's how we learn. It's the whole reason why we have free will. We have free will so that we can learn from our mistakes. And I always like the Thomas Edison quote where, you know, it took him 2,000 tries to make the incandescent light bulb. And the way he explained it was, I just learned 2,000 ways on how not to do it. So I always like that quote. Great, it's a great perspective on it. If we try something and it doesn't work, well, we know that's how we're not going to do it again. And we're going to move on to something else. And that's how we do the building blocks. And that's how we build our knowledge and our life experiences. So, cruising right along here. At some point, I don't know why this happens, but my PowerPoint gets unhappy. So in practice, why don't we just take a minute, and I'll go through the chats real quick. And Lorraine, you can stop recording if you want, if you know, we don't want people to have to wait through the in practice piece. So I want you to write down when were you last the beneficiary of change, and did it come at an opportune time? So when were you last the beneficiary of change, and when did it come at an opportune time? So why don't you take just a minute and do that? See how we're doing for chats. Okay, so no questions really in here, but write down your question, keep it with you, even for a future date. So tomorrow, we're going to talk about the power of observation. And I think what I'd like to ask you to do is, we've been running about a half hour, allow about 40 minutes for tomorrow. And it's going to be really fun. And then we're going to wrap up on Friday with self-limiting beliefs. So these are all going to be, I like the power of observation, and the perspectives and the self-limiting beliefs really going to be a lot of fun. So good to be with everybody. And feel free to send me an email if you have any questions or comments, and I'll love to hear from you. Take care.
Thanks.